Hi.
Okay, we're live. This is Senate Appropriations Committee, January 22nd. We've been going through budget adjustment, but we're going to have build the right features in to go over a report, which will have implications on budget stuff. But we want to just get an update on how things are going and the report that was issued recently, like last week. All right, I'll let you introduce yourself for the record.
Sure. So for the record, I'm Dr. Morgan Crossman. I'm the Executive Director of Building Bright Futures, which is Vermont's Early Childhood State Advisory Council. And this is my colleague, Anna Burlett, who is our Policy and Program Director.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, Mr. Brownie face. Last name. What's that? Yeah.
We announced that you were late.
First time.
I got Shanghai and I think you all set it up. I think Brendan was supposed to.
Okay.
Okay. He doesn't get a star.
Yeah.
All right. I'm Morgan Crossman. I'm the Executive Director of Building Bright Futures. We serve as Vermont's Early Childhood State Advisory Council. So we are named in both state and federal statute as your primary advisor on children and families prenatal to age 8. And one of our primary responsibilities within our legislative mandate is to monitor Act 76 and the impact of the child care law, among other components of our system for kids and families. One of the key things I need to name is that we are not lobbyists. We are advisors. We come to you and say, here's what we know, here's the data, here's the lived experience, and help support bringing you the most up-to-date, high-quality data to inform policy. We also don't administer programs. So we work with the administration as well as legislative leaders to say, what do you need to know? What is the impact you're looking to make? Let us help you articulate that in the context of the vision that we've set out for kids and families over a period of time.
Did you exist before Act 76? And
We did, yes.
Right.
Yep. So it expanded our charge in Act 76. So we're in Title 33, Chapter 46, and also in the Federal Head Start Act. So our scope expanded, and one of the primary functions in Act 76 for us is that monitoring element. So how do we know if the system's actually functioning in the way that you intended it to? Is the law and the policy working? What are the funding implications? Were there unintended consequences? So really trying to understand what we're seeing from all sides of that equation. What does it look like for families? What does it look like for communities, early childhood educators, businesses, and folks across the system? I also want to reflect our current configuration of the board. So again, we are a nonpartisan data-driven entity. Our board is made up of 23 individuals, agency leaders across every agency, department, and division who support children and families, 2 legislative leaders. So from the Senate, it's Senator Gulick. And then we have a range of at-large members from partners across the state who are working directly with children and families. So just to remind folks of who is currently sitting in the voting seats on that board. Before we dive into Act 76 data, also want to articulate that we have just passed the next 5-year strategic plan for the state of Vermont for kids and families. So this board and Building Bright Futures as a whole was created just outside of state government to hold the vision and strategy for kids and families. Each 5 years, we go through a really robust process of collecting qualitative and quantitative data and doing a ton of systems monitoring to understand the needs of kids and families. This next strategic plan has 5 key goals. We're not going to go through them all today, but just wanting you to know that Act 76 is a key part of what is prioritized in Goal 3 related to early care and learning, early childhood education, and it's the primary strategy for how we fund our child care system in the state of Vermont, which is now operating at scale. So we're going to talk a little bit about big picture, where we are at Act 76. I would be the first to tell you that I did not think we would have made as much progress as we've had in this amount of time. From an econometrics perspective, a research perspective, what I said to everyone is we're looking for 5-year gains. 5 and 10 years is when we're likely to see impact. We are seeing significant measurable progress across all indicators. So the report that you have in your inboxes, but we can also send you another copy if you'd like. We sent the Act 76 monitoring report, and the most important thing I can say to you is that we as a state have made significant measurable progress. So for the first time, we've seen Act 76 not just being implemented, we're actually delivering service at scale.
And was it 2021? What year was it? Well, no, we passed that.
23. So again, that's a really quick turnaround for systemic change, right? And so when we're looking at the scale and what we are providing, there are a range of indicators that Anna's going to talk us through. But in terms of the 2025 data, what you're going to hear about is the Child Care Financial Assistance Program serving about 50% more families than it did before Act 76. And that families are really saying this is such a game changer for us in terms of lower co-pays. We're also seeing our programs report more predictable revenue, wage increases, benefit improvements, and the ways that they're able to invest in quality in the programs. At the same time, we as a state have distributed $2.7 million in quality capacity incentive payments to over 800 programs. And so we're operating a much larger system overall and really looking at that kind of fiscal stability. So again, in terms of the highest level, all of the core structures that were put in place in Act 76 are functioning the way they were intended to. I think calling attention to the national context is really important as we're talking about how well we are doing in Vermont in the childcare arena. It's a really sobering national moment in terms of, what many states are facing. So colleagues that we've been partnering with, learning from, and working with in the childcare and early care and education space are facing audits, a ton of funding uncertainty, fear and stress in families and providers and the administrators running those programs. So just naming that we as a state are not immune, but because of the investments we've made, we're in a much more stable position because of that sustained state level investment in the system that you've built.
Have you got any calls from the Mondami administration?
Not yet. Not yet. But it's so important that we are holding both of those things. We have done some really amazing work in the state of Vermont. We're still partnering with states across the country and meeting with them fairly regularly to understand what those tensions and challenges are, how they are handling some of these things. So yes, our system is doing incredibly well in the childcare space. We're delivering the results that you all intended to. And there's still some strain on our current system that we need to prioritize. And so that's why all of the monitoring that you all put into this legislation is so critical, because now we can actually tell you, here's what's going really well, and here's what we need to focus on in the next couple of years. So I'm going to turn it over to Anna to talk you through some of this. And the thing I would name is that 5-year strategic plan tells us in the next 5 years, here are the expectations for kids and families. We want high quality learning environments, and here's what we want for outcomes for kids. And again, we're already starting to see a ton of that progress, and our policy recommendations that we'll talk to you about a little bit later are where we're also seeing that the priorities for this coming year. Great.
And that is the 5-year plan as well for the long-term work. If an issue, we find it like under website.
Yes, so we can send you the 5-year strategic plan. We'll also send you the 1-pager, which is an amazing visual panels on it. And yes, all of this data and what Anna's going to be presenting today. If you look at that report, there's a 4-page data snapshot right after the executive summary, and that's the data we're going to be talking through this morning.
Finish recommendations in that 5-year plan, I see.
So the 5-year plan itself has the high-level 5 goals. Then there are objectives that we've set as a state. This is the broad vision. And then there are objectives and strategies for how we're going to, the policy recommendations are based on those. Here's what we need to do this year in order to make progress in that 5-year vision. So we'll walk you through the policy recommendations towards the end.
Okay, great. So before you go from this slide, I'm looking at the one on the left.
This is where we're gonna stay
We are
for
gonna
the moment.
Oh, I
Yes.
see. I'm just wondering why it looks like the last 2 figures don't correspond with the graph. So it goes from 12,000 to 11,000, but the graphic goes up.
Yes.
Is that on my?
So there's
There's a peak and then
so Anna Brulette, policy director for the record. We're excited to walk through some of these key indicators related to kind of family affordability, which, as folks know, was one of the key goals of Act 76. So the image that the senator points out illustrates a really steady incline here in the number of children specifically that are enrolled in the child care financial assistance program. In the report that Morgan referenced, you can see the same kind of increase happening for the number of families that we're serving, as you would expect. There's some slight kind of dips that folks might have noted. Those are really standard, kind of based on what we expect to see from childcare enrollment over the course of a year, which kind of corresponds with the kind of school
So this,
calendar.
the dotted line, those are quarters, basically.
Correct. Yeah, the dotted lines indicate quarters. We debated whether that was too much information for you all, quarterly versus annual, but it shows that there's a really, really nice increase. So it shows overall, an increase from about 7,500 children in 2023 to nearly 12,000 in 2025. So just over 2 years. That is not, as Morgan said, that's not a marginal change. We're talking about a really significant system scale expansion in access. And we see this across every age group. So you'll see in the right-hand graph here, the increase from, again, those same time points, September of 2023 to September of 2025, a really nice increase across infants, toddlers, preschool age children, and school age children who are accessing childcare financial assistance for things like after school and summer care. You also will see on the same slide, kind of pointing out just the scale of what the change in affordability looks like for families. So for a family at about 275% of the federal poverty level with 2 kids.
And if you happen to know what 275 is, then.
Great question.
That's how.
Not
We set
off the top of
chart,
my head.
pick it up.
The chart would be helpful, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I can get that for you after. But this would mean roughly,
Sorry to interrupt again, because sometimes people hear 275% and they
Yeah.
think that's a lot, but I know it's not.
well, so this, as folks might remember, and it looks like it's about $42,000 a year roughly. But as folks might remember, the eligibility overall goes up to 575. So previously, families at 275 would have been eligible, but they would have received less support through the program. Now we see that they're on average saving about $2,200 a month from being enrolled in childcare financial assistance program. So again, not talking about kind of a small discount, particularly for those low to low middle income families. We're talking about a massive difference in what it looks like for them to afford other parts of life, whether it be housing, groceries, other expenses, and could potentially also really impact their decision making around working, which we'll see a little bit more data around the next slide. So continuing on, looking at some indicators related to affordability and eligibility, one of the kind of things that we're keeping an eye on, and I think would be of interest to this committee, is that there are an additional 2,800 working families that were determined eligible in 2025 compared to 2023. So kind of looking at who is accessing the program overall, in 2025, 65% of families accessing the program are working families. I don't have historical data on that, but I would gander the guess that that is the highest percent of working families that we've likely ever had enrolled in the program. On the left-hand side here, you can see kind of the breakdown of families at various levels of the federal poverty level accessing childcare financial assistance as of September 2025. This does not include, one thing that's important to note is this does not include children that receive, whose families receive childcare financial assistance based on other service needs. So service needs such as protective service agreements or being determined eligible through the economic service divisions programs. So this underrepresents families overall, but you can see again, really nice participation from 175 to the top at 575. And of course, the families at that higher end of the income scale are receiving less assistance based on their income.
And you didn't ask for it, but my advice would be to add a dollar number, instead, maybe when you go to the next committee, just so, because people
How much assistance folks are receiving?
know the income levels, because I think
Okay,
they don't
yes.
understand it. Somebody at 200% poverty level is still.
Yeah,
very much.
not very-
yeah,
The
absolutely.
poverty level is very.
Yes. Great. Okay, so, access and kind of family affordability isn't the only part of the equation and isn't the only thing we want to kind of draw the committee's attention to. Our role in monitoring things related to childcare supply and the workforce are also really critical to understanding the impact of the investments and the ability for the impacts of the investments to be sustainable and for us to keep seeing the good gains that we've seen as a state. So this slide kind of illustrates a couple of mixed truths or kind of tensions in what we're seeing from the data. Which is aligned with what the intent of the law was, which was a real focus on family affordability and program sustainability, but less so on things related to the workforce directly. So on the positive side, you can see on the slide that we're seeing kind of modest gains, about a 5.2% growth in the workforce working in regulated childcare. And a more substantial gain, 22.4% increase in the number of educators with a degree that are in the workforce. That being said, kind of the collection of that data and the incentives to collect that data did increase during this time, along with the changes of Act 76. And at the same time, despite kind of these modest increases related to the workforce, we hear from conversations that we have with folks across the state that staffing shortages are still described as the biggest challenges across all of those conversations. So we had a series of listening sessions this fall with folks, and I attended those across the state and a few virtually, and universally staffing shortages, specifically kind of the delay that you all have likely heard about related to fingerprinting, supported background checks, comes up really universally as kind of the factor that that people worry about. It's strain on the workforce and on kind of growth in our childcare supply overall. We also still see gaps, especially for infant and toddler care. There's really great new work from our partners at First Orleans Finance about the supply and demand of regulated childcare. So you'll see some images from that study on the screen.
Senator Bruce.
Yeah,
I just want to stop you on infant and toddler.
sure.
In the budget last year, I believe we made a change that upped the percentage.
Yeah.
Has that had an impact yet?
Yeah, so we've heard that those increases were really helpful to programs. The increase was to the infant toddler reimbursement rates. As you referenced, it is quite recent, and folks in the listening sessions expressed gratitude. And I think those are having an impact. And we should actually add an image about this, but because of the kind of ratio that is required of infant care, it's still just so much more expensive to provide. And programs take a more significant loss in providing infant care, as you all know. So I think particularly for workforce, for having qualified, ready, early educators who are able to staff those infant rooms, it's still a big strain.
Thank you.
The thing I would add about that too is that what we're not showing is what that capacity and supply has looked like over time. And we have always had really big challenges with providing infant and toddler care in my slots. So just naming that this is a national and a kind of long-standing issue that we're paying attention to right now.
Yeah, so there's still supply and demand gaps, as we've noted, particularly in infant care as well as toddler care. And it's uneven. You know, the gains are uneven across the state, which is something we certainly kind of are monitoring as well. I think it's also kind of important to note that some of the gains that we're seeing in supply and in workforce are more side effects than versus like direct impacts of Act 76, because there wasn't that focus on the workforce. So anecdotally, we're hearing that many expansions are happening in programs that previously had closed classrooms because they couldn't find workers. So we're not necessarily seeing new spaces, there's new spaces, but there's also a lot of kind of newly reopened spaces, which is promising to see.
Or not closed space.
Not closed spaces.
So the graph of the desired capacity and slots. I'm not understanding what that graph, the lower right.
The lower right-hand graph.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's a stacked bar graph, so it's a little bit confusing. It shows that we currently have supply for about 3,000 infants.
Right.
Actually,
Now
no,
it says reported desired capacity.
yep, and if you look, it's the graph on top is 2025, the graph on the bottom is 2023. So we're seeing an increase in the capacity overall, but there's still a gap of a little less than 5,000 slots for infants statewide.
So the yellow from both of those is supposed to be the same. One is current functional capacity, one is reported desired capacity. They're
Yes,
both supposed to be the supply.
yes, they both are essentially supply. I think there was a change. We have to vote friend in the methodology there, but I think there was a change in how it was
The
calculated.
basic is the green is shrinking. That
Correct. The green is shrinking.
That's what.
Yeah.
Okay, we get it. Thank you.
Well, no, that was just
Okay.
it. The green was,
Yeah.
you know, the gap is being reduced.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so I'm gonna hand it back over to Morgan, who's gonna talk a little bit more about kind of the fiscal status of the program.
And before I do that, I just want to name that the way that we're compiling all of this data is by partnership with the Child Development Division, the Department of Taxes, the Agency of Education, and then a range of community-based partners who are also actively collecting data on workforce conditions, what is happening in the field. So a part of our job is not always to be capturing and collecting new data, although we are. It's also compiling it and bringing it to you all. So as we're talking about finance, if there are very in-depth questions around the payroll tax and the ways these things are working, absolutely drawing your attention to the tax department and to the Child Development Division for additional data here. However, because this committee is very excited to hear about spending and revenues and all of those projections, what's really important for you to know right now is that childcare contribution revenue is stabilizing. And in talking with the Child Development Division, but also the Department of Tax, they're projecting that there's about 99% of that roughly $172 million budgeted for CCFAP will be expended. So we are not in a position like we have been in previous years where there is an underspend of a significant dollar amount. We're talking about a 1%.
Yeah, for FY 26, that's your projection.
That is the projection based on the mid-year, right? So what you're seeing is that the timeline of reporting between tax and CDD is, we're still getting that data in. So based on their current projections, we are planning to spend 99% of that funding.
So, in other words, it's an illusion that we've earned by 12,000.
Correct. So there have been several discussions among partners and others asking questions about a significant underspend. That's not actually what we're seeing based on these projections.
I will say, I feel like we're nitpicking your slides.
Okay.
I don't mean to do that, but this is the second time in your presentation that somebody looking at it would say there's a fall off from the previous year, and there's not. If I'm understanding you correctly, there's neither a fall off in the revenue nor in the uptick. But looking quickly at several of the slides, I give that impression. So here, I don't know that I would present it that way, because when you look at the total and then you look at the years, you're like, oh, so somebody not having your verbal explanation is going to come to just
A different conclusion. Yes.
the opposite.
Entirely fair.
But just because you don't have 2 quarters.
It's because there are 2 quarters missing. Did you?
Yeah, I would just add, and again, the Department of Taxes are the folks to talk about with, more specifics, but from what I understand from what they conveyed to our team, you're seeing about $20 million per quarter this fiscal year, which is what they anticipate seeing in those second 2 quarters.
Yep.
So again, stabilizing and should be actually notably higher than it was in the first fiscal year that this was implemented, given compliance and rollout and all of those things.
That's why the Q1 of FY 25 was so low, because that's just when it started to roll.
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. So
Well, that is big news.
it is
Congratulations.
to you all.
To all.
Congratulations to everyone, right? This one's really important because, again, we're seeing it quicker than most people would have anticipated. This is very large scale systems change. What we're seeing is a very complex system mature really quickly. We're seeing predictable revenue, we're seeing predictable spending at this point, and really high participation rates already in, a matter of a couple of years. So really, really important, and a really big celebration for the state in the context of what else we're seeing across the country. I can't come in and present all fun things to you. So I do want to also call attention to some of the challenges and the constraints that we're facing. Again, it's not to say that we shouldn't be celebrating where there are real wins. It's how do we now maintain and where do we prioritize for this next year? And so some of the things that we are continuing to see that Anna already mentioned is workforce shortages and sustainability challenges for programs. And there are a range of partners with the Child Development Division and others really focusing in this area. I should also name for this committee in particular that in the last month and a half, we received as a state $12.7 million from the federal government through something called the Preschool Development Grant. Building Bright Futures in partnership with primarily the Agency of Human Services Child Development Division, but also the Agency of Education and others submitted a really strong application, and we're one of 23 states who received this funding, and it is all about strengthening early childhood education systems. So that includes childcare, pre-kindergarten education. So we are really prioritizing a lot of the challenges that you're hearing about this afternoon. In terms of administrative complexity, there are always challenges with rollout and implementation. What I will say is that I've been really impressed with the way that the Child Development Division has managed this process in terms of the communication and in terms of the partnership with communities and folks who are administering programs, implementing different pieces and capturing data. So one of the things that I think Hannah mentioned earlier was some of the challenges around fingerprinting and background checks and the way that, again, state agencies are trying to come together to solve some of these big challenges for programs. The other thing that you saw, especially when we're talking about access and what that looks like, there's still inequitable access, and it really depends on where in the state our kids and families are. So that's something we're also monitoring. What we need to pay attention to, though, is this is absolutely anticipated change and implementation challenges. So not looking at this as a sign of policy failure, it's here's what we prioritize next as we're thinking about how our system is changing and what are the pressure points and what are the levers that we need to use to refine and to stabilize the system. All right. And I mentioned policy recs earlier, so just want to close with saying we have a range of recommendations that come from the State Advisory Council Network. The one that is specific to these child care investments are really about Act 76 and protecting the investment that you all have made and how we think about strengthening all of those systems to support kids and families. And it's really about, again, protecting the investments that we've made and ensuring that we're taking the next step in supporting early childhood education holistically. The other that I would call your attention to, because so many folks are talking about pre-kindergarten education this year in the context of ed transformation, is that we are very focused on how we maintain and continue strengthening universal pre-kindergarten education. In terms of the kind of final takeaways, the big picture is Act 76 is working, and you all have so much, we as a state have so much to celebrate. We are delivering services to kids at scale. We're stabilizing families and programs. And it's in such an important moment, given the national context where other states across the country are really struggling in child care. And the investment that we've made is actually moving us in the opposite direction. So we're doing a really great job. Our job for the next year, the next 5 and 10, is to continue monitoring, but also to maintain stability of this system and to make sure that we have equitable access and variety.
Great.
Any questions for us?
When it's first, today.
We did wrap that from.
No, I don't. Okay, yeah, Senator Wells will be here shortly, I think.
I think that's just close.
Yes.
Yeah, were they here? Yeah, they said, I got enough that they were really late.
Like,
Just saw Robin Poker.
Yeah, it's like,
Since we have a
Yeah.
second, you don't have any interaction with, CVOEO, program, do you?
We do.
They're federal, right?
So, in terms of our monitoring, we came and talked to you about childcare today, but we're actually responsible for monitoring the entire early childhood system, whether it is pre-K related, mental health, basic needs. We have so many partners, and actually, we had a member on our board from CVOEO in previous years, and so we interact. Yeah, we work very closely with the Head Start programs, and have been monitoring what is happening federally, both with the Head Start directors themselves, but also with the treasurer's office and the administration to really think about how we prioritize and how we think about Head Start in the context of childcare, pre-kindergarten education, and after school.
great, now you. I don't know if you've looked at the language about the Child Care Fund and the Budget Adjustment Act, it's in the House. We'll wait to like get into it till it comes over here, but I don't know. And you're not lobbyist, so you probably can't answer the question, but I'd be interested in what you or others in that space think of that language and how it deals with the money.
Happy to come back, but I will not come in and tell you what I think you
Yeah.
should do about it, but I will answer questions and help you think critically about it
Right.
based on the visions.
Or if there's what impacts you might.
Yep.
Speak
It
of that.
hasn't, and that's like,
Okay, good. Thank you.
thank you all.
Thanks for your work.
Thank you. Yeah.
See you next week.
I'll see if there are actually.
Hi, everybody. Sheriff. The president. Good to see you. Running man.
Everybody.
That's something we know. Huh?
Good to see you.
Yeah,
Man, it's so good to be here.
thank you so much for joining us. Floor is yours.
Is that the introduction?
Yeah, you know everybody here, so we don't need to do
You
introduction.
know what? I love it, because in my line of work, there's the high point, the low point is the introduction. Years away from the truth and the self-serving.
Yeah,
Well, you know the situation. I wanted to start by saying, again, I so appreciate the work that the whole General Assembly is doing, but it's incredibly difficult now because we went from COVID where there was a lot of money coming in and you had to figure out how to use it in a practical way to the end of those funds. And then the thing that is the most worrisome to me, and I'm sure to you, is that there's an effort in the administration, especially with this Russell vote, to claw back money that Congress has approved and that you're depending on, rightly so. And you're seeing that in a variety of different programs. So it's not, you don't even have this, it's not going from the timing that was ambitious. The activist efforts on the part of the federal government to help all states cope with the lights being out in the economy during COVID to that drying up. But you now have one big beautiful bill, for instance, that took an immense amount of money away. It was just cuts across the board, especially in healthcare, which and it's very disturbing to you and to all of us. But that's something where we know that the hospitals are already starting to adjust because of the anticipation of the loss of revenue. They're going to see more local universities in their healthcare, but still need care. So I really worry about that a lot. We're making, there's a bunch of us on both sides of the aisle, small group, still doing our level best to see if we can somehow extend the tax credits for folks who are getting their healthcare in the exchange. I was talking to somebody from the Northeast Kingdom. He's a farmer, but his premiums here in Vermont are going from $900 to $3,200 a month, right? So likely he's not going to get insurance or have to get some incredibly different plan. So those are actions that the federal government is taking that are imposing an incredible burden, not just on the states, but on the communities, because the ripple effect on that is really, really terrible. And some of the things also that are in the air is the funding we got for broadband was really terrific. And we in Vermont set up a tremendous model with our community union districts. And then the new administration is really being difficult about allocating that money. And also this apparently shown a real bias for the satellite Starlink system that of course is a Musk program. That's something that just doesn't work in Vermont. At least in lots of Vermont's where we have posts and stuff, it's just not a practical option. And one of the things I worry about on that is that the whole point of getting the broadband deployed was we get the high-speed broadband, so we're future-proofed and we're not getting, because we're a rural area, being treated like the second-class citizen, because you guys know very, very, very well, preaching the choir, but we're not going to have an economy if we don't have the same access to high-speed internet. That's now an essential component of having an economy. And with people working remote, that has to be something that's available to anybody who is simply not. There's some good news, but it's complicated with sort of non-budgetary reason issues. But the Senate appropriators in the House and in the Senate are working in very bipartisan way and trying to get the appropriation bill back on track. In the Senate, Senator Collins and Senator Murray and members of the committee. And when we return, actually, the House right now is considering a number of the budget bills, and we've been operating a lot of times on these so-called continuing resolutions. And I mean, the people in this room with the responsibility of passing the budget, you know how hard it is. But what's happened in Washington is that your equivalent committee and our does not pass the budget, so you get continuing resolution. It's just kind of a flat line approach, which obviously means you're not making judgments about hard judgments you have to make about where you do have to increase your spending or places where you might have to cut in order to accommodate the revenue base you're going to have. So there's really good news there because there's responsible funding, I would say, for a lot of the service programs, a lot of healthcare programs, and the education programs. The question we're going to have is just emerging, is rising up what's going on in the Homeland Security budget, what's going on in Minneapolis and other states where there's just such a core the conduct of ICE that's running into jeopardy the capacity to pass 3 different budget bills that have the most impact on our states. Okay, so that's just part of the situation we have in Washington with the new administration. So all of that is to say, you've got the dynamic in Washington where the head of the Office of Management and Budget vote. He is using tools that have not been used. In my view, he does not have the right to use, and that includes empowerment. That includes taking money that was specifically appropriated for one purpose and diverting it into another purpose. The administration is feeling and is interfering with the congressional prerogatives, legislative prerogatives, by impounding money that was appropriated on the basis of a decision by the committee and then, your full Senate assembly. In a hostility towards the federal government playing a partnership role in many areas that the states legitimately do federal help on. So that creates obviously a fair amount of uncertainty for you guys because it's changing. It's not like even if there's an agreement that necessarily means that it will be followed by the administration. So I don't have an answer for how we deal with that. But I am opposed that burden is being imposed on you and your counterparts in the legislatures around the country. But that is the reality of the dynamic we're facing. So the bottom line here is that you've got the good news is that you've got the Senate appropriators and the House appropriators who are working mostly in a bipartisan way. That's good, and want to pass a budget that is more consistent with maintaining the commitments that the federal government has had to the states. Number 2, you have a dangerous dynamic with the administration and people like Russell Bowden, who see what the Congress pass it as a budget as advisory, to follow what they feel it. And they don't usually, the rest of it doesn't usually follow. So literally, it would be as if you guys passed the budget here, you got the full vote of the Senate and the House, and then we had the administration action that said that we won't follow this regard. So it's tough. It's a tough time. And the other thing, of course, is that the revenue base has been hammered with the money we bill. Those tax cuts are not beneficial to Vermont. With the revenue loss that's detrimental to Vermont. We say that taxes aren't beneficial because they really are skewed towards corporations and very wealthy. And just on that point, this is related to the budget. But it's, Vermont has been such a leader in the effort to have campaign finance reform. We passed legislation to limit on how much a campaign could spend, and it was ultimately declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. But in the year before Citizens United was passed, the 100 wealthiest individuals in the United States contributed $44 million to health campaigns. last year it was $1 billion. And they don't speak for the majority of needs of Vermonters. I mean, I bring that up because it's a dynamic that, is really affecting the latitude that I think that the Democratic elected people can do with this. There's a needs money influence that goes into that $1 billion that 100 people donated to the various campaigns. So I wanted to stop there and then where I began, express my gratitude probably.
Yeah. Pro Tem Senator Bruce.
Thank you, Senator Welch. Specific question, and maybe coming from my own paranoia, but as the saying goes, it's not paranoid if they really are out to get you. So I'm thinking about the money for rural hospitals,
Right.
the 195 or 198, I can't remember, million over 5 years for a total of $1 billion. On its face, it seems great, understanding that the big beautiful bill cuts healthcare elsewhere to a much greater degree. So in that sense, it's taking a bunch, giving you back a little. But with that said, my worry is that as they're rolling that out, at the very last moment in the process, there will be an attempt to assert conditions like making gender affirming care illegal.
Right.
Is that something you think is a worry founded in reality, or do you think that money truly is going to roll out without further conditions?
No, here's what I have seen and observed. I think I'll be reading the news to see and observe. There's an immense amount of arbitrary actions that come out of nowhere for no reason. Okay, so you don't know, but what you do know is that you can't count on anything, because if there is an arbitrary reason that the administration has, like something you did or Governor Scott did, will they act? They've done it. I mean, we've seen that. We've seen actions that are being done as political payback when the administration doesn't like what someone did. So I think that your apprehension about that has a very solid foundation. I hate to say that. Okay, I hate it. And by the way, that could happen in blue states. Obviously, are being targeted more, but that arbitrary conduct goes across the board a lot of times, and you can't operate. It's like these tariffs. I'm talking about businesses, and it's not just how high the tariffs are and how that eats into the profit. They don't know what it is from day to day. So how do you appropriate when you don't know from day to day what it's going to be? But my thought on that is that you've just got to do the best you can, have the best policy, and do everything that's within your power to do. But I think it's a healthy apprehension that maybe it can turn out. But by the way, that's a really important thing. I talked just briefly with the governor about, this is where this is going to be your responsibility, the governor's responsibility, but that's going to make a difference if you can get a good plan. It's actually going to be about getting a better healthcare system and benefits to Vermonters, as opposed to like a study or, and I think the danger that I'm worried about is that if it's not done in a timely way, there'll be a lot of administration people who want to claw that back. So I would be focused on getting this done, and getting it done right, and getting it done quickly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
A question on Congress's lack of a backbone, maybe is one way of saying it, to stand up to the administration. I'm not surprised what the administration is doing to the budget as you laid out, but I have been surprised that Congress has kind of rolled over on it, not you, and it's the majority there, but I don't know if you've seen any change in your colleagues, like that they maybe have enough of that, because you're basically bypassing the Congress.
You have raised, but I think is the existential crisis in government. You're seeing executive overreach and congressional capitulation, and it's a toxic burden. we as, all of us have a responsibility to the institutional authorities and responsibilities we have, whatever branch of government we're in. And obviously the legislature is the same as us, taxing, spending is really your job. And that's been encroached upon. And this is Congress is new. I mean, I was talking to Senator Leahy about this, but in years past, when there was like an impoundment, which is essentially executive disregard of the decision of the General Assembly, the Republicans and Democrats were united in opposing that because it went to the heart of what your responsibility is. I use this third, I can use the term authority, but it's not that you need the authority, it's your job to be doing that. So I think that's the biggest.
We're not seeing any change, like that those that have capitulated are getting tired of it or wondering what their purpose is. If they're
I'm seeing no change. I'm seeing the answer is no, not yet. Not in, what there should be here is an institutional coalition that we stand for, making sure that the General Assembly has the powers to represent the people that sent us here. And if you give up your taxing and spending, what's the point? Okay. And I'm not seeing that that's the case in Congress. And one of the things I do is spend a lot of time talking to my Republican colleagues, because I'll ask them about, hey, what's going to happen to your community hospitals? Because the harm that's being inflicted here, it's not a partisan deal. Okay, so when I was talking to these folks in Vermont businesses yesterday about the tariffs and what they're going through, I don't know who was Republican there or Democrat, right? They just all had the same responsibility that their businesses work, and they're all being harmed in the same way by the tariffs. So when I talk to my colleagues, I'll say, what's going on with like your small businesses and these tariffs? And the story that will give me is identical to what I heard yesterday. This is what really makes me kind of heartbroken, because the pain and the challenges that you're contending with here on behalf of Vermonters, access to healthcare, affordable housing, better education, those are universal. The needs are universal. Okay. And you have to have a strong legislature to be able to play an effective role in trying to address it. So unfortunately, I can't say that I'm seeing pushback. And I saw a little bit of Denmark issue, the Denmark, and the president, when we were there last week, was still threatening military action there and the tariffs. And I saw more response from my colleagues about this, since it was such a damaging impact on NATO, since it was so patently arbitrary. But I think we've got to get there.
Yeah.
And we really do. That's our job as legislators, not as Republicans or Democrats.
And I know you have other things you're doing today, but is there any sign of hope that you can give us? That
Well, the hope I got is coming in this building.
yeah.
No, I'm quite serious. Look, this is new, what's going on in Washington. All right. There used to be guardrails, and you have a fierce fight, as you do in this bill, about policy. But we're now having a fierce fight about whether Congress should even exist, right? And you're seeing shocking things like people get prosecuted because the administration does not like their political point of view. I mean, that's a horrible, shocking, terrible thing to do. So the norms have been shattered. And, the thing I run into is, I think, identical to what you run into. People ask, what can I do, or what's going on? And the fact is, we've got to hang in. But I do think that our legislatures where there is more of an intimacy and an appreciation that there's shared problems, even if there's a fierce debate about the solutions, that muscle has to be strengthened. And we need more of what you do here in Washington.
Yes.
So, my hope is that people are at the local level, I see, are being creative and hanging in, even if they're dismayed about what's happening down in Washington. And the speech today in Davos was a pretty astonishing thing, because it was not a recitation of mutual support and mutual aspiration. It was a kind of wholesale criticism of people who've been our very, very close friends for centuries, right? But we got to hang in. And it's important what you're doing here. It's really hard. It's been harder than ever. And I do think it's really also important to try to maintain the bipartisan commitment to solving problems. I'm not asking anybody to back off and fierce advocacy for your point of view. But at the end of the day, we got to make housing better. At the end of the day, we got to make education better. At the end of the day, we have to have healthcare more affordable and accessible. And what I think is the glue here is that even folks that you disagree with and the disagreements in this room, you can have some confidence that the underlying motivation is to achieve that goal. And I'm not certain that's necessarily the case where I'm working now. Well, it's really, really nice for me to get back. I mean, we had Northeast Kingdom Day, just running into lots of people, just seeing everybody working hard and doing the best they can. It's really good.
Yeah.
So you come, it feels like welcome home.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, no, it's very, very nice. I mean, it's special what we have here, but it's not, the pressures that are being imposed on you, and then of course the dialogue, it's all divisive. That takes its toll on that capacity, because trust is so essential in the work you do, and that includes trusting people you disagree with, right? So the language is so used, the vilification in Washington just erodes that trust. It's the glue that helps us get through our differences. So it's a different world when I went there in 2007.
Well, your comment about working together is so absolutely critical, and just reassure that I think we're doing that, as you know.
I think you are too. No, I think you are too. And it's really, really important, even if you don't see the payoff now. It's sad for me because there's a lot of really good people in the Senate. None of my Republican colleagues are really good. They're under a lot of pressure because they pay a price if they defy Trump. So it's a tough. They're in a tough situation. But we do have a responsibility to our institution, regardless of which party. So thank you.
Thank you.
No, it's really been nice to be with you. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
It's good to see what you took.
At the store, the picture of you until it started slinging onions. So
I planned my career. I could sling onions, but you wouldn't let me take them. Okay.
That cheerful report will move to the state budget.
I think the term backbone was what was key.
Yeah, right.
Chocolate or this go.
They need a guy.
Okay, so want to follow protocol. Commissioner Gresham regrets that he can't make it this afternoon. He had a personal issue come up, which his wife's ill, but I will try to take you through
Okay.
on my own.
Okay.
And
We're ready.
you don't mind that the clock has already been run a little bit by Senator Welch, so you have,
But he didn't give us any good news, so we're hoping you only has good things.
I would have to say it's not necessarily bad. We put together a budget that, Commissioner Gresham was quoted as, telling the media in a briefing the other day, in which no one will go hungry. Although it's tighter than it has been in recent years, I think that's a pretty fair assessment. We're putting forth a budget that continues to fund current services of government. And that uses up most of the base revenue available. We're a lot lighter on the one-time initiatives and somewhat lighter on base initiatives, but government is continuing to be funded, and you'll see where the priorities for the remaining funds are going in terms of initiatives, which is primarily to emergency housing. So I am ready to walk you through. I thought what I would do. Does everyone have a copy of this
We
document?
do not, just
On your screen?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are those available? Because I like hard copies of it.
couldn't find them.
They were not.
We can we can ask the print room.
Yeah.
They'll take one.
They were not printed in the bound book form this year. Just one of our belt tightening measures in the as we embark on this new learning season. But I don't have any copies, and I'm sorry I didn't bring any. I would
Sorry,
suggest
it's gonna be projected,
No, well, I don't know if you could do that now.
if you would.
Posted, but I will go get the copies and they will be here in like 10 minutes.
Okay. And I'm going to key on really 2 pages of the document and walk you through the GF budget construct. And those are pages, they're described in the book as pages 10 and 11. And if you're printing from the PDF document, they actually display after the title pages 11 and 12 on the PDF. I did print out one large print edition for my aging eyes to walk through, but if it would be helpful, we could pull this up on the screen if that would be helpful in the meantime. You got her. Is everyone up to speed and on the same page as I am?
Yeah. We'll print some out, so we'll get some, and looks like people have some access to a screen, so we can look at them. I had a question about where the cover photo.
I'm actually not prepared.
It used to be Caledonia when Jane
Was always there to do it.
Caledonia.
Could be Washington County.
Here you go.
I think it's Washington County, and in recent years, our executive assistant, Anna Reingold, has provided all the cover photos for the executive budget summary from her own collection of photographs she's taken. So I'll have to ask her specifically where it came from.
Nice.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So now we are all literally on the same page. And I was going to kick it off with this page, which is a brief review, a summary of all of the revenue sources that are incorporated in the governor's budget. Starting at the top, the largest number, the 2.533 billion, is the e-board forecast as of last Friday. The forecast did involve a revenue downgrade for the first time in quite a few years. So that number, the 2.533, is down 8.6 million from the July e-board upgrade. Although to kind of put things in perspective, you may recall from January 26, we were at a 2.4 billion even revenue forecast. It was upgraded pretty significantly, 77 million or so in July. And so now we're just taking an $8.6 million step down from that. So another way, as I was kind of looking at last year's same book that's being presented now, even though we're we're in what we feel is a tightening revenue environment, and the downgrade was something that certainly caught everyone's attention. We're still $130 million up from the January 26 revenue forecast for fiscal 26. So I just think it's helpful to kind of look at it, we keep things in perspective. So and that represents a 5.4% increase from the FY 26 revenue as of last year. But it's only in terms of the revised numbers, we're only up 2.1% from the FY 26 revenue level as of July. I hope that's not confusing, but just one way I was trying to get the top line numbers in my head for frame of reference. So we're starting with the e-board revenue forecast at the top. We add to that additional property transfer tax, which is additional to the amounts that the economists forecast. No way does this affect the statutory property transfer tax obligations. The PHCB is being fully funded.
This is the additional property tax. That's the estimate. This is the forecast number, not the actual.
That's right. We're forecasting this amount of additional property tax
Additional
above the portion of additional to the portion that's in the 2.533. And actually, this part of the presentation, I know Commissioner Gresham explained in House Appropriations the other day, and I did not brush up.
Right, I can't remember why there is a funny. I can respond with that. Right.
With that detail afterward. I'm sorry, I don't have it at the tip of my
I
tongue.
don't know, like something happens after we hit a certain amount of property tax, right? And then a different formula pertains to that, like, so then it doesn't go to the CHCD and saying, the formula changes after a certain dollar amount.
That is true. However, I think those amounts are still covered in the economist forecast. This is something that comes from the tax from the tax department in addition. And I'm sorry, I can't recall the exact
I remember talking about it last
the exact reasoning at this time. It has been and that number in recent years with more substantial real estate sales volume, that number was in like the $15 million range. It's come down relatively over the past few years. So the next clump of numbers are the direct applications, primarily from other areas of government that we consider additional sources of base general fund revenue. The AHS certified matching funds transfer has remained at the same amount for a number of years now. The amount from Department of Financial Regulation, $66.4 million, is fairly consistent with the FY 26 level. AG settlements estimate of $2 million is identical to FY 26. Unclaimed property is up a bit, and sports wagering about flat. The main change was in liquor, actually, where we're up about $6 million. We were at a lower, an artificially kind of understated amount for the FY 26 liquor direct application of under $15 million. And that was because they were in a deficit position. So they were catching up to get out of the deficit. You may recall there were a few years in a row that, based on some liquor legislation, the direct app from liquor was set in statute or in session law, at least, at a particular amount. But that meant that there was actually more coming out than they had to give, and it created over a few years a deficit position. That's been cleared up, that now we're hoping we're back to business as usual and back to like the 20 million plus range for a direct app from liquor, as opposed to the FY 26 level 14 point something. It was a little under $15 million. So
Do you think that we will return to getting a direct app from Secretary of State's office? Because I don't think we've gotten one on.
we haven't in a few years now.
I wonder how long do we keep it on the list?
Um,
I didn't know if that was temporary or are we just assuming things have changed how they're operating that office, that where there wouldn't be access.
what I know is that for, at least a couple of years, what we heard was that they were funding like IT modernization and some kind of unique, what sounded like, unique, sort of upgrade and modernization initiative type things. So, might expect we're not spending every dime if those projects have run their course, but we're
We can ask the Secretary of State.
Yeah. So that total of 108 million in direct applications from other funds is up 6 million from the FY26 line. Again, that's primarily attributed to the liquor transfer. We do have two sources of one-time revenue. There's a $9.5 million number, which is reversions from prior year one-time appropriations, some of them going back to as far as fiscal 18 and associated with programs that have been dormant for years that may have had a $20,000 balance or $200,000 that was still unobligated. We were really doing some look under the couch cushion work here during the past few weeks, especially in light of the revenue change, to come up with a little bit more to cover the bottom line with the governor's initiative plans. So those are all itemized in the D102 section of the language. Over half of that amount is from a single appropriation, which was a FEMA denial reserve. So it really wasn't appropriated for a specific purpose other than if we have things denied by FEMA, we've got this $15 million reserve we can tap into. There was still, there is, as of a couple of weeks ago, there was 10.6 million remaining in that reserve appropriation unobligated. We are proposing to reserve 5.1 or a little less than half of that amount. And Doug Farnham, our chief recovery officer, advised us that he didn't think that amount would pose any problem based on, what their experience is so far and what they are aware of. And in terms of things that could be at risk for denial.
Senator Wright,
Is that pot of money unrestricted or is it, unrestricted, I guess?
So, by the pot, you mean the FEMA denial reserve appropriation?
Yeah.
It's unrestricted in the sense that it can be applied to any denial of a FEMA claim.
In any area?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. And so, my recollection is that whether it were, COVID related or flood related, I think we're already past the COVID. I think we're done with all the COVID process. And in fact, we are also proposing to revert an $890,000 balance as part of this 9.5 that was from a COVID FEMA reserve. But yeah, I mean, restricted to in the sense that it could only be used towards FEMA denials, but yeah. So we're leaving over 5 million still with this proposal in that bucket should things come up.
Well, we did have that one denial from the kitchen. Their appeal, so I think that was under $5 million.
I'm aware of one that's a 2 million. That's in the pipeline.
Is that reversions from prior one-time appropriation include the money that was in S90, 91?
Oh, the $10 million.
Is that 10 or 9?
That was $10 million that's still floating around in the budget.
Where was that?
Yeah,
That's
wasn't
the bottom
that.
line.
It wasn't that.
it's not that. These are specific, these are funds sitting, with departments for various one-time appropriation purposes. And what we did was go through with every agency and department reporting to the governor and ask for a status update on all these appropriations, most of them prior to FY 25. I think there's only one that involved 25. And, you know, identify, for instance, in granting programs, okay, everything's obligated except $200,000. We're going to recommend the 200,000 be reverted and so on and so forth. So this is, what I like to call couch cushion money, which is, we're going to, you know, go back, start turning the house upside down and find funds that we may have forgotten about. So, and the detail is in D102 and, you know, for more specific questions, any of the agencies and departments representing those appropriations can provide more detail. The one thing I did want to key on is they were all offered up voluntarily by agencies and departments, as opposed to being, you know, just shaken down by finance and management. So we were, we were, you know, persistent in our inquiries, but there was, everything was, I use the term voluntary in terms of the agencies and departments thought these amounts could be offered. So that's the 9.5 million of reversions. And then, there's the big number, the 104.9 million, which represents, two reserves being unreserved. The first of those is a $30 million reserve established in Act 27, which specified a number of different potential uses for the reserve, among them property tax relief being listed as one of those uses by the legislature. So the governor is proposing to unreserve that amount for the purpose of property tax relief, and also unreserve the $74.9 million that he recommended be put into a reserve in the Budget Adjustment Act for FY 26. And again, the source of that 74.9 million available unallocated in FY 26, that's largely related to the aforementioned revenue upgrade in July 25 and forward. So
Yes, there was.
So this 74.9 million, is that money that is otherwise right now sitting in the general fund? Where does that live?
yes, yep.
Okay.
Yep, so it's an unallocated balance on the general fund, which is not currently reserved if the Budget Adjustment Act proposed by the governor were enacted verbatim by the legislature. I won't hold my breath, but we'll put that out there. Then it would be reserved and held in that reserve until the close of FY 26, in which case it would become available for property tax relief in 27. So.
Okay.
Any questions on the sources totaling the 2.759 billion for the general fund? Okay. So I'm going to flip my page over, and on page 11, we have a somewhat longer list describing all the uses of that $2.759 billion.
It's page 12 on the PDF.
Yep, page 12 on the PDF, and the page number at the bottom of the page is page 11. So the top box, there are three boxes, sections that make up this worksheet. The very top one is where we are describing current services appropriation changes, basically. So this is where, as the governor mentioned in his speech, a $139 million cost just to keep the lights on and keep doing things as we are doing without program changes. And so this worksheet basically attempts to provide a little bit more detail behind that number. The first number we sort of need to calculate is what's the starting point to compare to for FY 26 base appropriations for current services. So we're coming up with the top bolded number on the right-hand column of 2.35 billion by taking FY 26 as past base appropriations in Act 27, sections B100 through B1000. That adds up to $2.319 billion. We add to that the general fund pay act appropriations for all three branches. That adds the $27.791 million. The next adjustment is a little less straightforward, and I probably need to take a moment to explain. I'm adding on this worksheet this $4.035 million amount to the base starting point to account for what was essentially general fund support in FY26 to the Cannabis Control Board. And the reason I'm doing this is that one of the aspects of the governor's current services budget recommendation, and it's buried in this longer line of items labeled current services appropriation changes, but there is actually a new general fund appropriation to the Cannabis Control Board in the governor's recommended budget. That's $4.576 million. They have not previously ever received a general fund appropriation. In the past, they have always funded all their operations out from the Cannabis Regulation Fund. The only source of revenue into that fund are fees paid by licensees. And there has been a gap of approximately this $4 million in FY26 between the fee revenue collected into the Cannabis Regulation Fund and the operating expenses of the board. And in FY26, the only way they're getting funded without going into a deficit position is, according to law, what they did, and this was going back to 2022, Act 185, for FY23, 24, and 25, the cannabis excise tax, instead of going to the general fund where it was supposed to go, was redirected by the legislature to go into the Cannabis Regulation Fund. And then it was specified in law that for those 3 fiscal years, the CCB would spend as much as they needed to out of that fund, essentially. And at the end of the year, after the close of the year, the Commissioner of Finance and Management would sweep the balance into the general fund. It's kind of a bizarre structure, and the revenue wasn't even reflected in the GF in the same year as it was being generated by sales. What we ended up doing for FY26 was, instead of sweeping that whole amount according to law, we not withstood law and left $4 million in their fund, knowing that that would be enough to fund the gap through FY26, and knowing that we would need to come up with some solution since the excise tax is now going to the general fund, and it's now part of our general fund revenue that we're reporting, every month, that we're going to need to do something else to fund this operation. So we're proposing a general fund appropriation now in the amount required to fund their current operations. And that's a little over $4.5 million. That's up quite a bit, $500,000 from the amount of support they needed in FY26, largely because their operations now include a lab operation and operating costs. And so it's our hope that now they're built up and built out, and now they've got their enforcement pieces, their lab pieces. We'll fund them with the general fund appropriation as needed, and then hopefully we'll only see relatively small changes in line with other agency and department-based appropriations going forward in FY28 and beyond. But in this year, this is a new thing, and that's why I'm showing the offset of money that would have otherwise gone to the general fund up above that $4 million. Otherwise, our current services increase year over year would look, I think, higher than it really is, since we were supporting this operation. Sorry, it took a little bit of a long-winded explanation, but I wanted to explain what was going on with that.
Why do you have these? I guess I'm not understanding this worksheet a little bit.
Sure.
Why you have this FY26, like the base appropriations?
Okay, sure. So the big sound bite is, people say, okay, how much are your base appropriations increase? How much is your base spending going up?
Right.
In order to calculate that, we first have to calculate what's the base that we're starting from. So that's why we have a few numbers here. Besides just the Act 27 total base appropriations, we really, we
So it's
have
just
to,
on there for comparison purposes.
it's for comparison purposes.
Doesn't go into your calculations or other ones.
No, it's to, well, it only informs the calculation of, for instance, if I didn't include that 4 million for cannabis as in the starting point, then at the bottom, instead of showing $139 million increase just to keep the lights on, it would show 143,
Yeah.
and it would show 6.1% instead of 5.9. So it's just a matter of, and then the other adjustments there are actually specified in law. So the legislature gave itself $1.5 million extra dollars in FY26. You may recall, anticipating uncertainty around, we may have to keep coming back due to federal fund issues and so on and so forth. But in the bill, that's right, it wasn't used. And also in the bill, there was language, and I think the citation is specified here saying, for purposes of calculating base appropriations, this should not be considered part of our base, even though it was in that base depth ID.
I get it. I get
so,
it now that
so that's what that's all about, is to make some adjustments to come up with the starting point of 2.35 billion. And then these are all the things we're adding to that in order to come up with, we're adding 139 million of changes to come up with now a current services amount of 2.489 billion. And then this is how it breaks down in terms of what are the specific pressures that are causing that, just to keep the current services activities. So they're itemized out here. The first one is increase in salaries and wages, which for the general fund is $28.4 million pressure.
and you don't have to go through each one. Like,
I will then highlight the most notable areas. So there are significant increases here pertaining to the agency of digital services.
right.
So there is
So there's an increase in their general fund appropriation, but a decrease in their SLA.
yes. So the first line listed here, which is the 10.834 million, that's the increase in allocated charges that are allocated out by formula to all agencies and departments statewide. And this is the amount that is budgeted to be borne by the general fund. The ADS allocation is also allocated out to special funds and federal funds as well. This is just the general fund pressure amount. One of the reasons it is increasing to such a degree is that ADS may have talked to you in the past about their plan to change their model of billing and recovery and budgeting. And a major component of that is to shift a number of costs from the SLA method of billing, which is in arrears a year after the fact, for actual services received.
Yeah, we
And there's some things that that are essentially received by all users. For instance, the Microsoft Office.
Mhm.
Microsoft Office costs are statewide, over $8 million. And instead of figuring out the license bill to each user and sending the itemized bills a year after the fact in arrears to users and agencies and departments named by name, they're just doing statewide Microsoft licensing, and they're now building it into the allocation. So for instance, just, $8 million or so of the increase is attributed to used to bill out by SLA for Microsoft. It's now just part of the allocation that's allocated to everyone. There are also other costs in there that involve things like cybersecurity costs, some of which have increased, I believe, and some of which had not previously really being adequately recovered by the billing model. So really, in sum, there's really two factors going on with the ADS increases. And so to speak in just kind of general terms, let's say around half or so of the increase, some of it is related to the change in model from things moving into the allocation that were formerly billed by SLA. However, what we found is that there were a lot of things that simply weren't being recovered.
Right.
They didn't have adequate systems. And so now, so that's some of the things that are being built into the allocation. And then some things to the tune of $9.084 million are now being funded with a straight GF appropriation, because some of their activities, which have increased in particular in recent years, involving things like artificial intelligence governance and data governance and some other things that it's hard to hand a department a bill for a specific service that they receive. It would be even harder to hand them a bill and then ask them to look for federal reimbursement.
Yeah.
So these base costs that were not, in our estimation, very allocable are being put into that $9 million GF number. And then the allocable charges are increasing because a lot of them are moving from the SLA model. So there is that corresponding decrease.
Yeah.
Still a net increase because a lot of things weren't adequately being captured, like cybersecurity costs that are allocable, but they weren't previously built into the model. So I'm sure you'll be interested to hear a lot more from ADS.
Yeah,
but
we could get it. So yeah, we don't have the time to get into that kind of level of detail. So any other highlights or things you want to point out?
Just in terms of magnitude, the increase in global commitment, GF match for federal funds is certainly a significant number at over $26 million. Over half of that amount over half of that increase is related to an FMAP percentage change, and the balance is really related to utilization increases. It's not caseload, it's utilization, and it's
Similar to in the VA.
Yes. That really certainly, retirement costs are significant. $23.6 million of increases related to the state teachers retirement system pension and OPEB out of the general fund, and about 11 million in the general fund related to retirement plans, to the employer contribution to both the defined benefit and defined contribution plans. And actually a couple $1 million of that is what I was surprised to see is related to the defined contribution plan, which is for people like me who are exempts and are not part of the pension system and choose instead to have a if I may not be around for enough years to invest into a pension plan, depending on the pleasure of our next governor, the DC plan. But the DC plan, the employer contributions have been increased significantly to account for it's not that the plan contribution amounts have changed, they're the same percentages. It's OPEB related costs. So they're now funding the other post-employment benefits piece, basically the health benefit, which can be earned at 5 or 10 and the other years of service achieved. That applies to DC people as well as to DV people, and that's a couple $1 million there of an increase. I mentioned the cannabis piece. So out of current services, that's really the meat of it. The other internal service fund allocations increases of a little over 3 million. I think work comp is the biggest single driver in there.
Okay.
The other questions on the current services piece?
No.
Okay. Moving into the next box, then we've got our governor's initiatives. So at the first section are our base initiatives, new base funding changes. And at the top, we've actually got a general fund decrease. So what we're proposing to do here is to fund reappraisal and listing payments that have historically been funded out of the general fund using the pilot special fund instead. So the pilot special fund, its balances have really been growing recently as more towns have added on the local option tax. So the local option tax, which is, I believe it was recently changed. It used to be 70-30.
75.
Now it's 75-25. But that, with more towns coming on, that 25% to the state has, built up a balance enough in that fund that tax can explain the details. Tax department can explain the details more than I can, but we'll be able to
I think
fund.
tomorrow we're gonna learn.
Okay, great. But this is based on, we'll still be able to fund 100% pilot payments to towns in terms
We
of
were
payment
paying appraisal costs before. This is new.
out of the general fund.
We were paying.
There's a bunch of,
Forgot that we were spending.
there's some weird different things that general fund was being used for, like towns with hydroelectric dams and the costs associated with those listing. There's some
Right.
lister training.
It's not all towns reappraisals. It was just certain ones.
Well, there's that certain ones, but then there's also, you can see the details in the language document.
Yeah.
There are these per parcel fees, or these per parcel payments of either $8.50 per parcel or $1 per parcel that are paid to towns when they do reappraisals. So that has been funded out of the general fund, and we're saying now, this money that came from the towns, why don't we fund that with the money from the towns going back to them, which would be a legitimate use of the fund, we believe, and let the general fund be freed up for general state
Senator
purposes.
North?
Yes, on those lines, I see the state, it's my understanding, the state has given permission to landowners who actually have two separate deeds, but their properties abut one another as far as the 8,050% fee is concerned. Is that saving or costing more? Are we losing money on that, or?
On that particular issue?
Yeah.
I would have to defer to the tax department's visit tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Because I know that, well, personally, I got two different deeds.
Right.
Because the properties abut one another, they can assess it as one whole properties with two separate deeds, and they only have to pay up one
Okay,
fee on that, so I'm wondering.
that's it. That's interesting.
Yeah,
So we'll still have the fee and the fee will go to the general fund.
But the fees, we're not changing the payment to the towns at all.
Right.
We're changing the source of the payment. The source of funds is now, we're proposing to use the pilot special fund to send the money back to the towns that they've already sent
back
us.
to the landowners.
Senator Watson.
So this change, I mean, I can check out the language, but this change you're proposing is for this to go, for these, payments to go on from the pilot fund in perpetuity, or is it just for this year?
Yes. Yeah, we're proposing
For-
statutory change.
Okay. And I mean, as I recall, I mean, we can talk about this more, but what I'm recalling is that we're not anticipating that the pilot fund is going to be going significantly downwards. And so I guess I'm just wondering about the pressure on the pilot
Yep.
fund to sustain
Yeah.
that kind of.
Yeah, I think Ted is gonna come in.
Okay.
So we're not here for tax. But we're
Okay, well,
here
Oh, okay.
to talk, competitive
Yeah.
analysis of the pilot fund and
Yep.
surplus. But is the dollar amount 3.4 million, is that just based on prior expenditures and appraisals, or does this have any connection to Act 73 and setting up of the new
It's not.
rotating appraisals?
No, I don't believe, well, the calculation of the amount was calculated by the tax department and given to us in terms of what would you expect we would be spending out of the general fund for these purposes. They performed the calculation, and then we took that number and said, okay, with this change in language in statute, we could create this amount of savings, reducing general fund appropriations and in replacing them with pilot special fund
Right,
appropriations.
under Act 73 said where the money for the appraisals was coming from. I remember they set up a new, so every town or every region gets a reappraisal every 3 years. So we don't have these such wild CLA changes.
Right.
But I don't remember where that money.
Well, we've given a payment to the town per parcel for a very long time.
Right, but I don't know if that was just gonna be the same under this new Act 73 system where each area gets appraised automatically every 3 years, but that's a separate question.
Okay, so, so
Again, you don't have to go through each line, but
moving on, yeah, I suppose just in terms of highlights, the base initiatives are smaller this year in terms of amounts, with the exception of, over $10 million for a DCF housing plan. And components of that are staffing, a hotel program, but for family and medically vulnerable persons, and also recovery shelters and case management services. This is an increase basically over an existing like 8 million for emergency housing that's already in the general assistance appropriation.
okay.
So they're looking at a total of like some 18 million of ongoing base to basically operate a shelter program as opposed to what we've been doing, which is more of the one-time funded.
And just recovery shelters, permanent shelters, or those like emergency shelters? I assume those are permanent shelters when you use the term recovery.
I believe so. You'll really need DCF to give you the more specific details, but
Yeah, okay. Any other?
and that's one of the components, and that's something like an operating cost of like a couple million or so out of that. That's not a majority component, but that's one of the pieces.
Okay.
So that's the big one. And then the second biggest one really is proposal for base funding for the Vermont Housing Improvement Program, the VHIP program, which has been tremendously successful. There was $4 million in the FY26 budget. That's all allocated at this time. We'd love to see the program continue every year at that level anyway. And so that's part of the governor's recommendation here. I was just looking quickly to see if there was anything else I should specifically call out. So moving on to one times again, DCF's emergency housing plan is the big ticket item. $21.183 million. $6 million of that is related to standing up new shelters.
Yeah, those emergency shelters.
What's that?
Would those be emergency shelters?
Yes.
Just temporary as needed?
Well, my understanding is more of a permanent shelter. You're standing up a shelter that will then be, an operating cost going forward once it's established. In this, so my understanding, Mr. Chair, of this number is there's about out of that 21.2, about 15 million is to continue emergency housing under the current model.
Different than funding above.
Yes, this is different. So we still have, so that you'll recall like what we call what's commonly referred to as the hotel motel, like that's just been funded with one-time appropriations. We still have to continue funding that type of service to the tune of 15 million, but then there's another 6 million which is a one-time cost, but will be to stand up what I understand to be a more permanent shelter solution that will then,
Is there language
also,
for this? Is there language for this?
I do not,
Or is it gonna be the GA housing, cold weather?
language does not really feature in
And then
in this bill. And we're reflecting the appropriations, but you'll,
You must have a breakdown between what would be more traditional GA, which is 15 and 6, and how, and they must have, when they come in, they must be able to give us at least the number of beds they would hope to open with the 6.
I'm sure they can.
Yeah, we'll get more information from DCF when they come in. Did we talk about police radios last year?
We did, yeah.
And then
I must confess, I've been talking about police radios more than I would have cared to lately, but we are hoping that we're coming up with a more permanent solution. So last year, there was one-time appropriation for police radios that replaced about half of their fleet. And they are eager to replace the balance. In the governor's FY26 budget, we put in $500,000 into their base. That would, so that every year we were picturing it, you can keep buying radios as you need them each year. And we won't be in this position where we all of a sudden need millions to replace an entire fleet. We thought that was a good idea. In fact, that was the governor's idea. And the governor said, just put in $500,000 a year. The problem for DPS is that for technological and other considerations, what they really need is to put away a little bit of money each year and then spend it in large chunks periodically. And what didn't work well from an accounting standpoint was putting it in their base, because it could be spent on anything. And if it wasn't, it could be carried forward, but then they would have to be sure to segregate that amount carried forward. And then are you going to build up carry forward amounts up to like $2 million over multiple years? So we said, okay, we've just got to set up a special fund. And we took it out of their base. We gave them a 500 on their ups and downs. You'll see a $500,000 down. And what we're saying instead is, let's send a transfer to a special fund, and it will be segregated and can be used for that purpose. And we're suggesting the $500,000 a year appropriation be replaced by an annual transfer in that amount. They're also able to sell old radio equipment and have that be a revenue source to the fund as well. So
Yeah, we discussed the 500,000 for the guns also on this. Right. I thought we asked for language on this to put together a 5-year plan. That's the work they were going to do. I haven't met with DPS, but I will bring this up in question.
Okay. Yeah, because maybe for the firearms, they want to have a replacement fund as well. So
It's supposed to be a 5-year capital plan. They're supposed to put together, not an automatic. I haven't talked it.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be good. Okay. I think that takes it down to transfers.
So so I should point out there's a total.
We have Richie Weston's favorite back bill to the.
That's exactly what I was gonna key on here. If you look in the language, the total transfer to the ed fund is $114.9 million. However, really only 104.9 of that is really for property tax relief. There is another $10 million that we're basically proposing to backfill lost revenue to the ed fund by starting to step down by $10 million a year, the motor vehicle purchase and use tax that's going to the ed fund. So that would be phased out by fiscal 31 in fiscal 31.
I said it was your favorite. Yes, it was yours.
No, it was 35.
You want to wait 5 years.
You know,
Yeah, we need 39.
we need 35.
Yeah.
It's better than nothing.
So those are all the policy related initiatives here in the middle box on this worksheet. At the bottom of the page, we've got transfers and reserves that are that are more or less required as opposed to being initiatives. We're making a transfer to the general obligation bonds debt service fund of about $74 million. That's down from, it was 81 million in FY 26. The actual amount of debt service obligations is around $77 million. However, we found that there was a remaining balance left in that, in the debt service fund. So that further reduced the amount of general fund we need to transfer to that fund. So we're saving, some $8 million versus what we sent to debt service last year from the general fund. The transfer to the capital infrastructure fund is formulaic. That's just based on 4% prior year appropriations, less debt service payment.
And that's also called the capital cash fund.
That's right.
Same thing.
Yes, this is,
It's 4% minus that 73 million. 4% the prior.
that's right. And transfer to the tax computer system modernization fund is something that we now see every year. 2 transfers, one from the GF and one from the education fund, in a smaller amount. And that's how taxes.
And does I can't remember what the capital infrastructure fund is included in the governor's budget, the uses of that?
It's included in the governor's capital budget recommendation. It is not included in this.
So not this thing,
In the
this is
operating.
the adjustment.
Yes,
So when does that come out later? No, this is adjustment because it's a 2-year budget.
that's right. That's right.
So this shows how the governor also
So there may,
spent that 17 million.
any uses of that would be shelved in, yes, in that document.
Well, and also any changes to the
That's
borrowing,
That's right.
both the cash and the.
Both cash, yes.
Okay, yes.
Does that tax computer modernization fund, does that go away or is that?
No, it goes-
maintenance? Like,
Yeah, it's every year. And so the history of this is they used to fund this fund, Senator Brennan, there was sort of a wonky formula, like they would take 2% of all collections or something like that. And when they were collecting a lot from delinquent taxpayers, there were that was funding this fund adequately. What happened, which is actually good news, is one of the results of all the investment in computer modernization is it made it easier for people to actually pay what they owe, but that meant collections went down. So now there was a gap, and they weren't, because that's what was in statute. The only mechanism was like to take a percentage off the top of everything they gained via collections. So what it was replaced by was now leaving collections alone. It all goes to the general fund instead of taking a piece. But what they're doing is allocating via a percentage basis. And I can't remember the exact formula. This is the 2nd or 3rd year that we've been doing this, but it's the general fund and the ed fund that both pay into this. It is every year from those 2 funds only. No other funds are assessed a transfer. We got the amount reserved in the budget stabilization reserve. This $9 million amount keeps it at its statutory maximum of 5%. So as much as it can hold there. And then we've got the 2753 reserve, which this amount's consistent with the report we presented to JFC, and I believe it was November. So you'll see at the very bottom line number of 2.759 billion should match to the dollar, the amount of sources listed on the other page. So you could call it a balanced budget proposal.
Looks like it. Okay,
you said that 9.4 was 5% statutorily max or 10?
I am
5%.
sure that's 5% of prior year appropriations.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's just the amount to get the fund up to 5%.
This is the amount to get it to, yes, to the statutory maximum level. So we're not allowed, and in fact, we're not required to put in that amount. Sometimes there's a misunderstanding there. It's not actually required by law. What the law says is it can hold no more than 5% of prior year appropriations. What we've done, at least in the past 5 budgets that I've been involved with, is funded to that maximum level for the budget stabilization reserve. There was a question in Hack about the balance reserve, often called a rainy day fund, and why we're not proposing a dedicated transfer into that fund, which there has not been one. That's funded through sort of the waterfall construct of unallocated funds at the end of
Is
the
there
year.
any money in that?
There is quite a bit.
Yeah.
Quite a bit. It's over 100 million, I believe. There is a general fund summary
Why do
document.
you think it's raining?
I can hear it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
It's raining over the transportation fund.
That's snowing.
There's, is there a human services caseload reserve?
There is, yeah. So on page 20,
That,
on page 21, Senator Westman, you'll see a document that's basically an operating statement, general fund summary FY 24 to 27. And at the bottom section of that page, at the bottom of the page labeled page 21, shows the reserve amounts. So the budget stabilization reserve,
is 120.
it will be if we add the $9 million in FY 27. It currently sits at 118 million. So we're proposing to add 9 to bring it up to 127. The GF balance reserve is almost $100 million. It's 99.06. And you can see the caseload reserve has been over $90 million in recent history.
What are the other reserves?
That's a great question. The 134 million you see in BAA is the 74.9 that the governor is proposing
Just to move it
to reserve. And then there are two $30 million reserves that I mentioned. One of them we're proposing to unreserve and use for property tax relief. The other $30 million reserve that you see is still reflected in FY 27. That one was fenced off by the legislature only for federal funds related concerns. So that one is still sitting there in FY 27.
Yeah, I was glad to see that you didn't spend that, because I think we're gonna need it, unfortunately.
The only reason I ask is, these are not very great amounts if the economy did turn down.
Yeah,
And, in relationship to, pick out a number, if there was an uptick in unemployment, what would that mean? And we are laying aside a significant amount of money for property tax relief. And as you look at this, these are not great numbers. If you went into a recession and where we are, I just bring that up.
right, whatever, $2.7 million, $100.7 million is pretty small. Do you know why it was capped? I asked somebody why we capped it. They were afraid of us reserving too much money because they just want to spend it for their, whatever they want today. Is there a gap, so you kind of recommended not the dollar amount,
So
percentage amount of,
I can't explain the history
just as an accountant,
behind the cap.
numbers guy, why, do you think 5% is the right number?
Well, the 5% reserve, we really can't touch it. The 5% reserve is only there when,
Just to close out the fiscal.
That's right.
close out the fiscal year, and then the first thing we have to pay for in the next fiscal year is that they created this when the governor brings up 91 is the year. We had a back deficit what the governor mentioned as the deficit in his speech was not the back deficit. It was the ongoing deficit, but we had a back deficit where they put tiers on the income tax. In the middle nineties, the bond agencies all came to all the states and said, you have to have a reserve. So we really can't use that for anything. The only thing we can use quickly if there was a downturn in the economy is the human services caseload reserve. And the balance
reserve as
we
well.
can use those and to have flexibility. So, and the 5%, some states have gone beyond the 5%, but we really can't use.
Right. You could sort of use it by what you budgeted, but it would be a sneaky way of using
Now,
it.
I noticed that in the last session, actually, the legislature increased the statutory maximum for the balance reserve to 10%.
Yeah. Because we had all that money. I think we had to put all the money aside that we wanted to federal fund. But do you have an opinion on the
Well,
other reserve?
the opinion I would give is that, again, to Senator Westman points out, the budget stabilization reserve, it's only there to go into a closeout if you need to. And so, well, it doesn't sound like a lot of money compared to 2.5 billion. On the other hand, if we're faced with dramatic change in revenue, we're required to present a rescission plan.
Right.
So we're going to be cutting expenses. So this is really only to cover what you haven't cut already. And if you still need something to close the year. So if you view it through that lens, it actually is quite a bit of money.
Yeah.
Because we're required by law to take, dramatic action to reduce our spending to match what the revenue is. And so this is really only like to cover the error.
Yeah.
And what I might say to you is you try to play with it. The bond houses would come in and they do a review every year of what we do, and they would come down on us hard.
Right. I mean, that's why we have to have a real balance.
That's why you have to have a real dollar. So it's really only those other two pots of money that come into use if we went into a downturn, or, and this we haven't faced before, or if we get to the second half of this year, and as they talk, Senator Welch talks about healthcare particularly, if they're, because Medicaid is the largest expenditure for that. And in the fall, we heard as much as 45,000 people could use their health care. Where would we go for money quickly it's only those two reserves that there. And given the amount we spend on Medicaid, which is $2 billion, that's not a lot of money.
Or we would cut services.
Or you would cut services.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's a good introduction to the governing budget.
Okay.
I think we're planning to adjourn about now. I think Norris wants to keep talking about the budget. So we'll